Hello and welcome to DevOps Underground. We have Peter with us today. He's the creator of the Karate Test Automation Framework and the CTO of Karate Labs. He has a track record of open source projects and has worked at such impressive companies as Yahoo and Intuit. Peter, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hey, Olga. Yeah, thanks for that introduction. So hi, everyone. I'm Peter, the co-founder of Karate Labs. I started an open source project called Karate 5 years back that is kind of popular. So I'm here to talk to you about that. So yeah, looking forward to this interaction.
Excellent. Looking forward to your talk. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Olga. Here goes. So let me start sharing. And while I bring up these slides, there we go. Great. So I'm here today to talk to you about karate. And some of you may have heard about this. What does karate do? It's a test automation project. Open source, started 5 years back. And I'll maybe spend a little bit of time introducing myself, giving you a little bit more about myself. And so I used to work at a company called Intuit. And 5 years back, I was part of the API platform team. A team building APIs, and I encountered a particular situation which was, the tests weren't running well. In fact, it's one of the worst things in the world of test automation, which is flaky tests, that the tests sometimes pass and then they sometimes fail. So unpredictability is one of the worst things in software. So when I investigated the test suite that my team was working on, I kind of very strongly felt that the way that API test automation was being done was lacking, and there could be a better way. So I decided to create a side project that was Karate, and we released it as an open source project on GitHub in 2017, February. And it took off. It surprised me, actually. I have actually a long track record of contributing to open source, going all the way back to 2004, when only SourceForge existed and there was no such thing as GitHub. And anyway, I think the timing was great because, as you all know, microservices are like a very integral part of the landscape, and it took off. There was a lot of traction. I got a lot of feedback, and that gave me a lot of motivation. And I kept working at Karate for 5 years, and it became so exciting that I decided to actually join up with a close friend of mine, Kapil, who's based in the UK. I'm based in India, Bangalore, by the way. And we have co-founded a company called Karate Labs. So I'll talk to you a little bit more about it towards the end. If you're interested, reach out to me and all that. So to summarize, it's very exciting. We got accepted to Y Combinator. Y Combinator is a prestigious startup accelerator in the US, in case you haven't heard of it. But out of 17,000 applications, we made it to the final 400 who got selected. We've just completed the batch. Super exciting. And we've got a lot of plans for the future besides the open source project, about which I'm going to talk to you for the next few minutes. I'm not sure as to how we can make this interactive, but let's see. This slide is why I think karate has become successful. Karate, by the way, has 5,800 stars on GitHub. It grew very fast. It's certainly popular. There's a lot of enterprise usage, large logos that use karate today that we have actually gone and talked to. And let me connect this to the theme of today's talk, right? Release with confidence and release faster. And one of the very crucial things about testing is that it's supposed to give you confidence about whatever you are releasing out there. And be it APIs or UIs or web interfaces, right? You need to be having the utmost confidence that when a user uses your software, it should be working as you expect. And more importantly, or equally importantly, as in when you keep releasing new versions of your software, you need to ensure that nothing's broken. And that's where automation really is relevant. So that's the whole part about confidence, because whenever you click that button or you check in code and you have ideally CI/CD and your whole DevOps pipeline in place, the moment the software hits your production system and goes live to customers, how confident are you that everything is tested and nothing's broken? And the reason I use the term with speed or faster, right, is because Karate, of all the test automation options that you have, there's plenty out there. There's very few for API test automation, and we'll talk a bit about that. But um, Karate is one of the few frameworks that allows you to do parallel execution. That's the second last block on the slide. And it's something that Karate did really well from day one. Um, it's kind of surprising to me actually that a lot of test automation tools don't get this right, but that's very important because we are talking about E2E testing, end-to-end integration tests, API tests, and especially UI automation tests are known to take a lot of time compared to unit testing. So, can you run your tests in parallel? And if you can run your tests in parallel, can you get the reports? Can you get one single report, right? That's one of the questions you should ask when you evaluate a test automation tool. So Karate, to summarize the slide, Karate has a reputation of being easy, simple, very readable, very maintenance friendly, fast because of parallel execution. And I want to spend 1 minute on the combination that we have. Karate is one of the few frameworks that combines API and UI automation into one single package. That's pretty cool. You can think of advantages because of that. And there's no open source tool for certain that allows you to do performance testing on top of that. The performance testing part, which is the last part of the slide, that's super cool in my opinion, because what it means is that if you have an API suite of functional tests, you can reuse it as is, as a performance test suite, for free almost. And you just add that multiplication factor, and you can imagine that typically teams have to call in another team to do performance testing. They're specialists in a particular tool like Gatling, Locust, K6, and all that. But Karate allows you to actually save a lot of time, because if you write your business flow once as a functional test, you can just reuse it for load testing. So with that, I talked about the success of Karate. We have 5,800 stars on GitHub. A lot of companies using it, and just one indication of the support and the recognition that we have is ThoughtWorks having declared that Karate is actually worthy of being assessed and then trialed. And hopefully in the next release of the ThoughtWorks Tech Radar, we will be right in the bullseye in the center. So we're looking forward to that actually. But we have a huge community. If you are interested in support, Stack Overflow is a way in which you can certainly get support. So before I get into a code sample of Karate, I just want to talk to you about where does Karate fit when it just comes to API testing. Now, API testing is the core of Karate. That's where it all started. And then, of course, things like UI automation and API mocking and performance testing were added on to Karate with, through the last 5 years. But you typically interact on a day-to-day basis with web applications of all shapes and sizes. If you think of Amazon or Gmail or a shopping cart, you have this bunch of HTML and JavaScript. And yes, typically today, experiences are driven by React, Angular, HTML/JS. There's a whole bunch of JavaScript in the browser typically that makes these API REST requests to the backend, returns JSON, and then that JSON gets converted to HTML. That's how most user experiences work today. And as you can see on the left-hand side of this picture, services are the building blocks on which all internet experiences lie. So where does karate fit into the scheme of things? Karate stands here, kind of in front of the services, replaces the whole browser, the JavaScript and the HTML and all of that, and makes simulates an end user. In this case, the end user being a user using a browser. So simulates that client and sees what comes back from the server, which is JSON. It could be XML, but here it's JSON. And karate then does the important business of assertions or validations. And I do keep making this point whenever I talk that if you're doing testing, the business of asserting that whatever data came back or whatever happened as an expected result actually happened. And I say this because I see a lot of people miss this fact. So which is why I talk about it a lot, and I actually created karate, as I would talk about, to be very specifically focused on this fact. As I said recently, automation is easy. There are plenty of test automation tools. Automation is easy, but testing is hard, right? And the other reason I show this slide, one more last takeaway before I move to the demo is, or move to the code. On this slide, you see the difference between API testing and UI automation. UI automation is notorious for being, hard to do, flaky. The browser is this big beast that sometimes has a mind of its own. A lot of things and a lot of stars and planets have to align for your browser to actually work properly. There's a lot of networking, there's a lot of HTML, and nowadays increasingly large blobs of JavaScript that need to come, land. DNS, needs to be in place before you actually get a page to load and start working. And all of us know that user interface, browser automation tests are known to have this flakiness issue, and they're very hard to maintain. They are very brittle. So whenever there's a small change made by the development team, it's quite likely that your UI automation tests break. So I want to call your attention to the right-hand side of this picture here, which is, API tests are known to be fast, simpler than UI automation tests for sure. There's only so much that you can do with an API endpoint. It's designed for machines, right? JSON and web services. And because of that, API tests have this reputation, and it's not just a reputation, it's actually true in real life. And I'm kind of living that for the last 5 years. API tests are probably the best bang for buck if you're interested in trying to get test coverage over your backend, functionality. And as I established, right, today everything is microservices or some kind of service, and your services mostly are the meat of whatever you're delivering to end users. So if you can test at least that and have minimal testing on the UI, that's a good thing. And more teams are realizing that. That's another reason why seeing more adoption of karate for API testing, and the fact that you can extend karate to do UI automation testing, and I'll do a quick demo, is great news for enterprises, because you can actually adjust your testing strategy. You can start with API testing, and then the moment you're comfortable with your API testing coverage, you can actually graduate to UI automation and then start extending, having more UI automation depending on the risk averseness that you have, whether you feel some flows are critical flows and so on, kind of things. So that ability to mix and match is great. That's why I thoroughly recommend a framework that actually does both API and UI automation testing, and karate is one of those frameworks. So I'll show you a quick hello world and give you some fundamentals on how karate works. One of the big takeaways that you should have looking at this chunk of code is that karate is not any programming language that you are used to. It's not Java, it's not JavaScript, certainly not Python or Ruby or any of those things that you might expect. It's slightly different. Those of you who have been in the test automation business for a long time may recognize the left hand side of the lines here. This cucumber that I'm referring to, given, when, then, is kind of this very traditional pattern of setting up and executing test scripts. So karate inherits that from cucumber. In the old days, karate was actually an extension of cucumber, but then we rewrote the engine and all of that. So this is karate, and I'll start talking about the details now. When it comes to API testing, JSON is native to karate. What this means is that, as you can see on the slide, you can express the data that you need to send to a server in very simple terms. You don't need double quotes. It's lenient JSON, which is a nice thing. The reason this is important is there are many. For example, if you were to write a test in Java or .NET, you would typically see programmers having to escape the double quotes, put a backslash, and it gets really ugly. So karate doesn't have those problems because you just write JSON inline in your test script. And the great thing is that this is exactly how JavaScript programmers write JSON, right? Single quotes are sufficient, double quotes are not required around the name here, which I'm just putting my mouse over. So that's about the JSON part. The other thing I want to call out is, if you look at the second word on each line, URL, I'll point to it, URL, request, method, status, path over here. These terms immediately make sense to anyone who's in the business of HTTP and REST. And that's why we call karate a DSL, or a domain specific language. It's kind of boils down into one word. What a typical programming language would need 10 or 15 lines to do. So karate tests are, as I said, have a reputation of being very simple. One line does a lot. It's very readable, and you can straight away eyeball this hello world example and understand that it's making 2 requests and all that. This is probably the most important part about karate, the assertions part. And remember, I'm big on assertions. And what's happening here is very interesting. We are actually checking that the response came back is a JSON, has 2 fields in it, ID and name. And very interestingly, you see this hash not null happening here, which is great, because this is one of the biggest pain points in API testing that we solved for in karate, which is if you get back unpredictable values like UUIDs or date stamps and time stamps, there's a very elegant way to handle that. You just use a identifier like not null. You can even do data types, but there's plenty here. In fact, the assertions part of karate itself is quite a large section in the documentation, which itself is quite large. So feel free to go and look at that. As I said, this particular very simple test actually does 2 requests. The second one is a get, and you can see that the data that came back from the response, we say response.id, we're actually able to elegantly chain data from the previous response into the next request. This is actually a big deal. Most of the time, you are actually connecting APIs together. Most of your end user, business flows, as a user navigates through a user interface, the API calls being made behind the scenes are very natural sequences that you need to actually capture when you're writing a test. Karate makes that easy. It's not so easy in many of the other tools out there. So with that, I just want to check that that we are still live. Sorry about that. And I'll switch to a quick real demo, because enough of me talking. What I'm showing you on the screen right now is Visual Studio Code. So this is how a karate test looks like, and it answers your question as to how does a karate test look like to someone who needs to sit down on a machine and actually develop test cases. So this is how it looks like. By the way, we have first class support for karate. We have a very popular Visual Studio Code plugin. So there's first class support for karate in Visual Studio Code, which is why if you look at we get syntax coloring, and more importantly, if I hover over here, this code lens, as it is called in Visual Studio Code, in the world of Visual Studio Code, yeah, I just click that, it runs. I don't need to actually get on the command line. You can, because command line invocation is, of course, one of the fundamentals of continuous integration and DevOps pipelines. Karate has pretty decent reports. I'll show you an example of a report in a moment. And one of the most, one of the things that users really like about Karate's reports is that you can see the HTTP traffic inline in the HTML report. This happens whether you write or you run tests in parallel. And one of the things I would like to demonstrate right now is if I simulate an error, what happens? You do get some kind of diagnostics on the console, but more importantly, if I reload the report, yes, it shows that there's an error, something failed. And Karate has really evolved this very nice way of dicing, slicing your JSON response. And keep in mind that this is a very hello world-ish example, but in real life, your JSON data would be massive. And no matter how complicated and how nested your data is, Karate does a good job in telling you what was what actually happened versus what was expected. So that's about how an API test looks like in Karate. And let me get back to the presentation. So I did an API test demo now, and let me talk for a couple of minutes and also show you a demo of the performance testing, aspect that I talked about. And then again, to repeat, right, what's so cool about the performance testing part? And again, for a moment, imagine traditionally how teams do performance testing. You've written all your functional tests in some tool, and then a few days before production, somebody wakes up and realizes that you haven't done performance testing or load testing. So you scramble, you call in some SWAT team, kind of a team in your organization that only knows how to use JMeter or K6 or Locust or whatever it is that you have standardized on, and you have to rewrite the flows that you already have as functional tests in another tool, get another, and then run. Maybe it's another team that actually runs the tests, and then finally you can eventually certify that your system is ready to take on load and so on. And what Karate does is pretty cool, which is you just need, if you have written your functional tests in Karate, you just add a load model, which is a multiplication factor, and Karate will do the rest. Karate delegates to Gatling, and you just get the reports. And I can actually do a quick demo of this right now. And what I'm going to do is actually show you an example of running a test on the command line. Yeah, if I just do npm tests, and of course I'm now using a Java project, and Java projects mean you can use IDEs like IntelliJ or Eclipse and NetBeans and so on, including Visual Studio Code. Of course, they have pretty good support for Java nowadays. I'm running this Gatling test, but I want to show you the report that comes out at the end of it. Let me just grab that URL and let me put it into a different browser. That's the Gatling report. So we just ran a performance test against particular backend. The backend that we ran this test against happens to be a Karate mock, which is also a part of this demo. It's like this is a very self-contained demo. No external APIs were harmed in the making of this demo. But I'll also show you in a moment why the delete operation took 800 milliseconds, whereas all the other API calls took very less time. And the reason is because of what you're looking at now. What I'm showing you now is a Karate mock. There are ways in a Karate mock, when you get into advanced Karate concepts, there are ways in a Karate mock that, yeah, I meant to highlight this, I'm sorry. So yeah, I'm highlighting this line number 23 here at the bottom. That's an example of, in a Karate mock, simulating a response delay. So we set it to 850 milliseconds. and we applied it to the delete endpoint. Of course, the karate mock, as if you are familiar with REST concepts, you know that this mock is handling a post, a put. In this case, it's just a get all, and the delete operation, where we use the same kind of karate gherkin syntax scenario, and we have a feature file which works very well. Yeah, we are saying that when the delete operation happens on the karate mock, please simulate 850 milliseconds of delay, and that's why we got that. And the takeaway is that two things: karate has both API testing, and now, as I'm showing you this file, karate has API mocking also as a capability. And the things that you can do in a mock are, as I said, simulate response times. This is important because, for example, if you want to know the answer to the question, what happens if one of my downstream systems is responding poorly or it's taking too much time, what is the impact of that under load on my actual API, which I'm trying to test, which I'm owning as a DevOps team. And this is how you can actually set up and orchestrate such tests to actually give you these kind of answers. So mocking is great in is great in so many situations. You can think of all those situations that you encounter in a typical software development, a large project when you have multiple dependencies. For example, if you depend on a third party service, they may not even have a test environment, or they would have a rule saying you can't do performance testing in our test environment. So what do? Do you not test? That's kind of not a good thing. So uh, invest time in writing mocks. And if you look at this mock that I'm showing you, karate mocks again have a reputation of being super simple. Even though all this code that I have highlighted here right now is actually the equivalent of code that you can expect. Things like Node.js/Express or Python Flask or Spring Boot or Tomcat. Karate has the system where you can, you know, express very concisely what a backend service needs to respond with. All the JSON manipulation capabilities of Karate that apply to API testing apply to the reverse of API testing, which is the API server handling, and it works great. So I do advise all teams to actually explore using mocks and integrating mocks into your testing pipelines, because if you do it right, you might be able to actually run your entire DevOps pipeline without connecting to any external system. You can run all your testing on local hosts. So you can imagine how fast your testing can be, and with the advantage that you don't need to depend on any other team or any staging environment or pre-prod environment of which is owned by another team, which you don't have full control over. So that was a lot about mocking and eventually performance testing. I kind of combined the mock and the performance testing demo into one. And finally, I think one of the key parts of karate is the UI automation. So I think this is a big deal, and this is relatively new in karate, but this capability of doing UI automation. And let me show you the architecture of UI automation in context. By the way, this slide is all the capabilities that exist as open source in karate. I'll also, before I close, I'll also talk a little bit about what we are planning next. And of course, again, a reminder that you should be able to find my social media profiles and LinkedIn handles pretty easily now. I think it's been shared as part of this meetup event. Do reach out to me with any thoughts, suggestions, or comments regarding our roadmap or anything you would like to see additionally in karate. So what I was saying is that I talked about API testing. I talked about API test doubles or mocks. I'm now going to spend a little time on web browser automation. We support Chrome natively. So this is equivalent. If you've heard of things like Puppeteer, we do exactly that, but we have written our own integration. We have written our own WebDriver integration. So what that means is that I know all of you have heard of Selenium. So Selenium depends on a particular specification called the W3C WebDriver specification. So we actually are a first class compliant implementation of that specification, which actually gives us cross browser support. And it also means that you can actually use remote grids. Any grid which is compliant with Selenium can be used for Karate UI automation. We also have Playwright supported. To be very honest, that's experimental, but it's nearing maturity as we get more feedback and all that. So this is very interesting. So Karate is one of those very unique frameworks that uh, what it means, what I just talked about, the Chrome DevTools, the WebDriver / Selenium support, and the Playwright support. What it means in real life is that if you have written a Karate test once and it's working against Chrome, you can reuse that same test without changes by just switching configuration against Firefox, Safari, and other browsers like IE and all that. Um, this is the typical theme of Karate, is trying to make things less complex, try to simplify things, try to abstract things away from you as far as possible. And if I were to show you a demo of the UI testing, let me just bring that up. Yeah, and what you're looking at is a user interface test. I'm going to run this. It's going to probably run very quickly. So I'll give you in advance a running commentary, or I'm going to explain what it's going to do. We're first going to go to GitHub. We're going to try and log in with a password, with a login and a password that won't work. Because it doesn't work, we're going to get this error message saying incorrect username or password. We actually assert that it appears on the screen. That's pretty important. I keep talking about assertions. We also take a screenshot, and I'll show you how it looks in the report. And then in part 2 of the same test, using the same browser, we go to google.com, we do a search for Karate DSL, and then at the end, we validate. We wait and validate. We have a keyword that does both. And by the way, one of the things that Karate does really well as a UI automation framework, besides things like iframe support, being able to navigate to different tabs, being able to go to different URLs within the same test, different domains, which a lot of tools actually struggle with. One of the things that Karate does really well is this whole system of weights, which is super important. Is very simple in terms of code in Karate. A lot of the frameworks that are there nowadays are JavaScript heavy frameworks. So you need to know JavaScript, such as you need to know what async, await, and promises are, and you need to be painfully aware of callbacks and what it means for the runtime sequence of execution of your tests, which is quite hard. Actually, I found that unless you're a seasoned JavaScript programmer, it's kind of hard sometimes to play along or to keep up with what some of the UI automation tools do today. And the reason I'm saying that is, if you look at this Karate test, it's kind of simple. Each line will execute in the exact sequence that you put it in. It's kind of simple. And on top of that, you have these special keywords to do waiting. There's a whole section in the Karate documentation as to you can wait for an element and then click on it. And we know from experience that this is one of the hardest things for UI automation. And Karate takes a lot of pain to get it right. And you can be the judge. Certainly, I invite all of you who haven't used Karate yet for UI automation to just try it out. You may be pleasantly surprised. And with that, I'm going to run this test. As I said, you first go to Google, you're going to see Chrome come up, hands-free. There it is. Okay. Login failed. Yeah, it asserted, it's moved on. It's all very, very quick. And if I now bring up the report, as I promised, yeah, that's our screenshot. Karate is already equipped to run these tests in the cloud. We have a special Docker container that you can run headless as well as non-headless tests, which means that you'll get a proper browser, you'll get a video recording of the test at the end of your test run. A lot of these problems have been solved by Karate, and you can certainly run UI automation tests in parallel. And you don't need, you can actually get by without installing a full-fledged grid, unlike some other tools, and it's kind of easier to manage. I'm not saying that it's super easy, I'm actually one of the first people who's going to admit that UI automation is non-trivial. I mean, for me personally, as an aside, uh, I started out with API test automation karate, and then API test automation kind of stabilized, and then I decided let's take on UI test automation. And there's a very interesting reason why I went after UI test automation was because I realized that um, the Selenium or the WebDriver specification is nothing but a bunch of REST endpoints. So Karate already does REST client stuff really really well. So I thought let's experiment. It was a very very successful experiment, and what you're looking at is the success or the result of that and a lot of other experiments that happened in between. So that's UI automation. Before I close, let me show you one more very important demo, which is the debug support. I actually believe Karate is the only framework that supports being able to, debug backwards, and I'll show you what I mean. But some of you have noticed, yeah, that's a breakpoint, as the tooltip is helpfully telling me right now. The breakpoint means that if I run this test in debug mode, which I'm doing right now, the test would actually stop at that breakpoint. So yeah, Chrome came up and then Chrome disappeared. Why? Because focus has come back to Visual Studio Code. If I rearrange the windows to actually show you what's going on, um, okay, yeah, this is great. This is actually the dream of anyone writing UI automation tests day in day out, that you can actually freeze time. Now look at the browser. You can of course bring up the web developer toolbar. Look at the DOM, which is something you would typically want to do if you're writing a lot of UI automation tests. What's interesting is that if you watch what I'm typing at the bottom of the screen, I'm going to say highlight login field. Hide that. Oops. And okay, that's the browser. Sorry, I just got lost for a minute. Yeah, there we are back. Yeah, I just typed highlight. I know the ID of the field that I want to highlight. So the moment I click enter now, you can focus your attention on the right side of this page, which means that you can, in real time, while the browser is paused at your breakpoint, you can actually start interacting with the screen, exploring it, figuring out what to put in your test in case your test is broken. And to demonstrate that, as I said that you can actually go back in time. So if I click this button, you can actually go back, rerun that step, and instead of XXX, I will put YYY, hot reload. And if I play the next step, you can see that we actually succeeded in changing the data using a hot reload that needs to be applied as part of your test script. This is pretty cool because, as you can, I'm sure you've already made the connection that this is great, especially when haven't you found yourself in the situation where you're running this very stubborn test that keeps failing at the last step, and you're trying to fix it, and you need to keep restarting, and you probably have this annoying login form at the start of your very script that keeps taking time. So this is this is great. Once you are able to get the debug support of Visual Studio Code working, as I just showed you, it means that you can have a pretty compelling developer experience when it comes to writing and maintaining UI automation tests. So, and of course, I have to say that the debug support that I just showed you is something that works even for normal API tests. And I have to repeat that Karate is one of the few frameworks that allows you to write API tests and UI automation tests in the same script. Which and you might ask, why is this a big deal? It is a big deal because think of situations like, as I said, right, in some actual customers using Karate, one of the patterns I've seen being used is that the login process, when you sign into an application you're trying to test, the login process typically takes around 5 seconds, right? It means loading the login page, entering the login name, entering the password, clicking enter, waiting for all the JavaScript validation to settle. Typically takes 5 seconds. and what you can do with hybrid testing. And by hybrid testing, I mean, you know, some part of your test script does API testing, the other part does UI automation. And so uh, using APIs, it's actually a millisecond call to sign into any typical SSO kind of a setup, get an OAuth token. And all teams know how to translate the token that you get into a cookie. You just drop that cookie onto Chrome. And then what that means is that you can just land straight on your dashboard page. This saves enormous amounts of time when you add up all the time taken in all your test suites. That's just one pattern. The other pattern that comes to mind is that you can imagine entering a transaction through the user interface, and then in the second part of your test, validating that the data in the database through an API call. Again, a very effective pattern. Think of the amount of coverage you're getting in one kind of a effective test. You're doing an E2A test, and you're actually testing all the layers of your application in different ways. So I'm sure you get a lot more ideas. If you think about the mocking capabilities that Karate adds from the API side, it is possible. But I don't have time for that demo. But it is actually possible for you to uh, redirect some parts of your user interface to mocks that are controlled by Karate. So you can actually fake a lot of user interface aspects if you really wanted to, if you get your test strategy, aligned in that manner. That's it. I'm not sure exactly how we can actually manage questions. So I'll see if we can hand back control to the floor. But before this, my last slide, I just want to give a preview. As I said, I promised about um, you know to talk a little bit about what are we doing at Karate Labs. What we talked about so far, the Karate open source project that has matured over 5 years, is the black section on the slide. You see the advantages: less code, API and UI testing, and performance testing combined, along with mocks, the reports, and parallel execution. And of course, I keep talking about assertions. But the blue section is our very exciting future. We already have the interop and standards piece ready, and we are launching a SaaS application next month. So if you're interested, please reach out to me for details. But what does that release that we're doing next month do? If you have a lot of Postman tests and you are looking to migrate that to Karate, or if your team finds it easy and has a lot of Postman tests already lying around, which is actually the case, and this is the reason why, based on the feedback that we got from all the customers that we talked to, we have a feature where we can import Postman collections, HAR files, curl commands, which are very easy to source from various places. We also import Swagger and Open API specification files. So that may be of tremendous interest to, I know, a lot of teams out there that might be standardizing or moving towards some of these new REST API standards. So if you have, some of these, if what I just talked about sounds interesting, please do reach out. And I think you know where to find me. At the very top, test case management is a big pain point that we feel we can actually integrate very successfully to all the pieces of test automation that we already have. So something that we are really looking forward to. And if you have been wondering whether there would be an IntelliJ plugin that has better support instead of the Cucumber rudimentary support that we have today, that's another thing that we are working on very actively. So if you want to know more details of a launch date, please reach out to me. With that, I'm through with the main part of my slides. So let's see if there's a way to take questions, or we can
Yes, we can see questions from the audience. Thank you very much for the talk. It was brilliant.
Thank you.
So let me read them out to you. Sorry if this material has already been covered, but I think it will be good to go over it again anyway. All right, so the first question is if Karate execution can be used for code coverage.
The answer is yes. And let's, there's a time to dig into the Karate homepage. But if I go to the Karate demo, it's easy. Just look for Karate demo. It's a whole subsection of documentation. And towards the end, there is an example of code coverage. There's even it's complicated, but you can theoretically do code coverage for non-Java projects. But if you have a Java project, it's super easy because there is an open source project called Jacoco. It's kind of straightforward. We have a recipe right here that allows you to integrate that into a Maven setup and actually generate code coverage. So yes, it does have some caveats that if it's easier to do if your Java code is in the same Maven project as your tests. But even if they aren't, there are ways in which you can work around. And as I said, you can even do code coverage for non-Java projects. I haven't personally done it, but there are people who've done it, and they have posted their solutions on Stack Overflow and on open source projects. So yes, short answer, you can do code coverage, and a lot of teams do that.
Thank you. All right. And another user is saying that they're blocked while using UI framework for Linux systems and trying to use headless mode in Linux. Is there any resources available to help with that?
If I understood the question correctly, it's got iframes and headless mode on Linux. Those are the two parts, right, Olga?
Yeah, that's right.
Right. So yeah. So I what we have tried to do is try to lean teams towards doing more of proper browser testing, which is not using headless mode. And we have a Docker container specially designed to do exactly that. If I yeah, there's a wiki page. It's again linked from the documentation where we have a special Docker image that we just released one actually yesterday. Okay, 3 days back. Yeah, I'm losing track of time here. As I said, we bring up full-fledged Google Chrome, including XVFB, which means it's head full, the opposite of headless. So you can actually see Chrome and actually get a video recording. Why I'm saying this is that we have found, no matter how much we want headless Chrome to be exactly equal to the opposite of headless Chrome, there are limitations. It won't behave the same, especially when it comes to tricky things like iframes or images or the size of things being laid out on Chrome. And because of that reason, we recommend that try to do more of your testing on proper Chrome, get the video recording and all that. Even though it might be fractionally slower, and we actually don't think it's that slow. And remember, Karate gives you options to scale out on Docker containers on Linux. So the Chrome container obviously is kind of hard bound to a Linux image. I forgot whether it's Alpine or something else in the Docker world. So we recommend that. That's our tried and tested path. You're welcome to experiment with other browser / operating system combinations on Docker or non-Docker. But I just want to say that headless is known to have some of these limitations, which is why we put all our effort into hey, take this Chrome container. We have tested this in production, battle tested this. Try to standardize your testing on this, and you have any edge cases, figure out other ways to address the risk of that. I hope that makes sense. It may not be the perfect answer, but that's what I have to say.
Thank you. Mr. Coder is asking if there is an example for WebSocket testing.
There is one. Let's see if we can bring that. Yes, so Karate is one of the few frameworks that supports WebSocket testing. We did this very early on. And again, Karate demo, as I was showing you on the homepage, it should have a WebSocket. Yeah, there is a WebSocket.feature. So this is the example. So what if I were to I can't run this right now. I can, but it'll probably waste 5 minutes. You can set up a WebSocket test. You just need to give the URL to Karate. And yeah, I was looking for this line. You can actually tell Karate to wait because the moment you get into things like WebSocket, it's asynchronous, right? So you will need to wait. But Karate has this event and asynchronous system baked into the core. So the end result is that if you can look at this, in fact, let's look at this test, right? We are yeah, in fact, this test is a little more complicated. You can actually write JavaScript, like what I've highlighted here. You can actually write JavaScript as an event handler. And in this case, we are, yeah, we are saying we are attaching this handler to the WebSocket that we started. And what it means is that the socket will keep listening until any message starts with hello. So this is an advanced test, but it's only some, yeah, 1 to 5 lines. But I just try to give you some two very simple examples of um, WebSocket tests. And I started this presentation by talking a lot about karate's very deep capability of matching. Right, karate's match keyword is how you assert for JSON. So I'm just taking the opportunity right now to call out the fact that this is a WebSocket test. You were able to set it up in some 2 lines. You were able to listen for something coming back in another 2 lines, and then the last line will be a match that actually can assert for plain text or complex JSON, including placeholders and data that's driven, perhaps from a data-driven loop and all that. Um, so yeah, I'm kind of rambling a little bit here, but yeah, WebSocket testing, no problem. Karate has a way to do it.
Very impressive. And you already mentioned that you can set JavaScript as handler. Presumably, you can set something written in Node.js as handler as well.
Not really. That's a great question. The moment I said JavaScript, I know that you must be wondering, is this the same JavaScript as normal browser JavaScript in the DOM or Node.js server-side JavaScript? And the answer is no. It's a very interesting fact architecturally that Karate actually happens to be implemented in Java. But I do want to caution anyone listening that even though Karate is written in Java, it makes no difference to the end user. As I said, the default experience for teams is using a Visual Studio Code experience. We have teams that use Python and .NET and C# using Karate very happily because the tests are in this programming language neutral script, right, which is designed to be simple. That said, when you mix JavaScript into Karate tests, like this example over here on line number 22, that is evaluated, that is handled by Karate's built-in JavaScript engine, which is not Node.js. So it means that it's very basic. It handles 100% of the ECMA EC6, the JSON standard. But it doesn't have those critical things like require and modules, which are a feature of the Node, the bigger JavaScript ecosystem. So yeah, bad news for those expecting it is that you don't have Node.js compatibility, but you can do all kinds of complicated logic, such as event handling that I'm showing you in this example. And I have to say at this point, we have just released a Karate NPM module. So I just want to show you that very quickly. This is important, and I'm glad you asked the question because I would have forgotten otherwise. But if you are in a team that uses Node a lot, and the reason we created this Node NPM option for Karate is that there are some teams where the CI/CD pipelines, so the DevOps pipelines, are only supporting NPM packages. No problem. We have a solution where you can use Karate, the Karate NPM package rather, and then you write this one simple entry point as a Node script, and you can run all your Karate tests using the syntax that I talked about. Get all the reports, pass those reports to your CI/CD controller, whether it's Jenkins or GitHub Actions or Travis or whatever it is. So I have that to say on the NPM side, even though the JavaScript that you write within Karate scripts is somewhat trimmed down, sanitized JavaScript, if I dare to use the word. Yeah, that's my
Understood.
answer.
Still very impressive. All right. The next question we have is if it's going to support page object model in UI tests.
It does. In fact, I think some people who know me know that I don't have a great opinion of page object model. I subscribe to the camp, and I'm not alone. There are many people out there who complain about the page object model. I will show you this. What I advise as an answer to this question is that please go to the Karate UI documentation. You will be able to find a link from the homepage, and I have a section on. Um, it's been a while. Code reuse, possibly. Locator lookup. There is a solution for a page object model pattern to be applied by Karate. So if you create a JSON file like this, what I've just highlighted, that has this nested structure, and this can be as deep a nesting that you want. There's no limit. You can see, right, we have broadly two categories in your application: test accounts, left nav, and transactions, kind of typical for most applications actually. And then within that you can have subsections like home, invoices, and then you can have locators for each. And there is a way in which you can actually in a single line you can actually load this on into memory, and then you can start reusing the locators as, what do you say, defined, as structured in your this JSON file, which I consider it's like a tree map. It's like a navigation map of your entire application. So answer is yes, we can do this. The reason I'm not a big proponent of this is that it forces you to look at two different files all the time when you're trying to maintain your tests. And I hold a very, I hold this opinion, and I could be wrong, but I hold this opinion that Karate is so simple that the benefits you get by trying to centralize all these things in a one file are lost, because Karate makes it so simple to write a single line that actually performs an action. So you may, again, the option is there, as I'm highlighting. You are free to experiment, but I found many teams, they've experimented and they've gone back. You know what? We'll just write normal, sequential flows. Try not to obsess too much about object orientation and reuse, and they can actually get the job done relatively efficiently. So yeah, that's my answer to that.
Very nice. Thank you. All right. Next question is about IntelliJ plugin. Is there one planned and when?
Oh yeah, okay, good. So that definitely is good validation that you got excited hearing that we have plans to do it. I can't commit on a date, but it's going to be very soon. Is all I can say for now. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Can we make calls to two different URLs at the same scenario in different steps?
Absolutely, yes. Even though the example that I showed, started with one URL, I can very well say, repeat the URL and then have the path, which means it can go to a completely different URL. Let's try get, and let's make this test pass now. Yeah, absolutely possible. The sky is the limit. As I said, this is just scratching the surface. You can actually call. You can start doing a UI automation test and then go back to API. There's no restriction on what kind of URLs you can actually call within a Karate test. So hope that helps. Yeah.
Thank you. And the last few records are from Surab. He's continuing the conversation about the headless mode. He just posted them. Basically, he says it's working on Windows, but not on Linux. And he's trying to use Karate config GS and run suite on Linux. The solution you covered is on Docker. It's also okay to say that perhaps this is something we can take offline. And
yeah. I mean,
it seems like a very involved conversation.
But as I said, I'll be the first person to say that, man, UI test automation was one of the hardest things I've ever done. So I'm not surprised that you found problems on each operating system, and each browser combination is going to have its own quirks. It's unfortunate, but that's the reality of the world that we live in. But do reach out to me offline or post a question on Stack Overflow. I'll do my best to help you. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your time today. I have no other questions. I was really impressed with the talk. I had to deal with API testing myself, and have to say it's a very difficult task to accomplish, just like you described, especially when it comes to UI. It's just a whole other level of difficult. So this is a
You
great
said
talk.
it.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Olga. Thanks, everyone. And thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much. Hey.